All right. Hello, everyone. It's CJ with Rogue Money, and it's that time of the week for another edition of Hanging with Harley. I have the honor of riding shotgun today with Harley as V is currently in a meeting. And obviously, Harley needs no introduction at all. The tremendous work that he does with the LaRouche PAC, with the Schiller Institute. We're just very thankful that our listeners get an opportunity to listen to Harley for his perspective in terms of what is happening with the U.S. political as well as geopolitical. So, Harley, welcome. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you, CJ?
I'm doing great, Harley. There's a lot of things happening right now. I know we talked a little bit before we went on in regards to the neocons and their attempts to persuade Trump into escalation with several of these things. So why don't we jump into that?
Yeah, I think people really need to take a minute and think about the danger of a worsening situation strategically, which is largely the result of not finishing off the Mueller investigation. As long as this Russiagate investigation continues, it gives the neocons more wiggle room to insinuate themselves in the Trump policy. And so we see a real schizophrenia. On the one hand, you have Trump talking to Xi Jinping 2 days ago and talking about, how wonderful the discussion was. They talked about trade, they talked about North Korea, a good ongoing personal relationship. And then you have the discussion coming out that China is a problem on trade, China is possibly a problem on Trump saying there may not be a peaceful solution to the North Korean situation. I think from day to day, there's this ambiguity, which, while some people say may be Trump's great strength, it actually is a detriment to the initiatives that he's taken. So if I can just take a couple of these things apart and give your listeners a sense of some developments in the last couple of days. Conference in Vancouver, Canada, that was called by the foreign minister of Canada, who is a hardcore neocon named Chris Freeland. And it was on the Korean crisis. 23 nations were invited, including Belgium and Cyprus. What do they have to do with the Korean Peninsula? Well, they were the allies of the United States during the Korean War in the early 1950s. Who was left out? Russia and China, who President Trump has said are the most important countries for dealing with the problem in North Korea. So why were they left out? Well, the Chinese took note of this and were very unhappy with it. But they said, look, our policy is to work with the US administration and we'll do what we're doing. Now, at the same time, you have an escalation from knuckleheads like Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, who are attacking the Confucius Institutes on campuses in the United States. And they're saying that these are instruments of Chinese subversion in America. And what is it that they say they're doing? Well, they're teaching American students to speak Chinese. So somehow that's an instrument of subversion of the United States. You see at the University of Texas, Cruz and his allies shut down the China-US Institute there. If we're going to be able to cooperate with China, which the president has said is one of his major goals, you can't have idiots like Cruz and Rubio getting in the middle of this. Similarly, you have Tillerson putting out very mixed signals. On the one side, he's continuing to talk with Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, both about the Korean situation and Syria. And yet on the other side, yesterday, Tillerson said, we need a solution in Syria without Assad. Now, he's on record repeatedly of saying we're not for regime change. So what's the shift there? Now, it's our assessment that what's going on here is that as the Mueller investigation is tripping on its own 2 feet, that the neocons are more aggressively pushing for a type confrontation with Russia and China. This is the whole reason behind Russiagate in the first place. They do not want Trump to form a cooperative alliance with Putin and Xi Jinping. Trump, in spite of all the efforts to prevent him from doing so, has had an ongoing discussion process with both Putin and Xi. The neocons are insinuating themselves into this situation, both inside and outside the administration. And a lot of the initiative for this is coming from the British Empire. The Economist, and if people don't believe this, check out the December 16th, 2017 issue of The Economist, which is all about why it's necessary to have the US against China, pitted against China, not cooperating, not falling for China's discussion of collaboration. This is the British. They absolutely oppose the possibility that we could have a world where the great powers work together, as opposed to are in a constant state of geopolitical confrontation. Now, the other point to make in the introduction, CJ, and I'm sorry for going on so long, but I just wanted to.
No, Harley, you're absolutely fine. Please keep going.
I just wanted to get this picture out there. What's in the background of this, besides the Mueller investigation being proven to be nothing but a soft coup or a hard coup, a fraud? The other thing going on is the financial crisis. There are two major companies, one a British company, the other a South African company, that deal in retail, retail, including mortgages of retail properties, that are going belly up. Now, these are very large companies, and they represent the front end of an ongoing collapse of the large department stores, the retailers, and others. And while, look, some people can say, well, we don't need them because we've got Amazon. Well, if you want to give more power to Jeff Bezos, I think you need the same kind of mental exam that the president was given the other day. But more important than that, what's the problem? All of these retail stores have long-term, overpriced mortgages on commercial properties. The commercial property markets are collapsing. These represent a very large portion of corporate debt. Corporate debt is now over $14 trillion in the United States. And since 2012, it's gone up almost $5 trillion. And over half of that borrowing, that new borrowing, new debt of corporations, went to buying stocks, their own stocks. So if you want to know about the stock bubble, it's been based on the funneling of funds at low interest to major corporations and banks, their own stocks. That's a bubble that's going to pop. And there are more and more voices recognizing that. So in the circumstances of the collapse of the Mueller investigation, the possible collapse of Mueller's investigation, and a financial collapse, what do we see? Things like the alert, the nuclear alert in Hawaii, things like the threats to break up the potential for a North Korea-South Korea cooperation, or at least an opening. So I think that's what we have to keep our eye on as we're in the early parts of this new year.
Right. Very valid point, Harley. And it was interesting in regards to, the conversation with China and Ted Cruz and their lashing out against China, because I noticed also there were certain articles that the mainstream media was pushing out there in regards to China as well, that they were, burning down Christian churches, all this propaganda that's starting to come forth. Now, I do want to ask you specifically with the Mueller investigation, and on the news today was talking specifically regarding Steve Bannon and his potential testimony. Steve Bannon, from your understanding, good guy, bad guy, neocon. What are your thoughts?
Well, the one thing I can say about Bannon is that he was not involved in the part of the campaign. Democrats are accusing Trump of meddling or colluding with Russia. And he himself has said on several occasions he wasn't around for any of those meetings in the beginning. Now, what they'd like to do is see if they could get him to corroborate whatever story they're feeding Michael Flynn. But, my thoughts on Bannon, the thing that has always worried me about him is his line on China. It's the neocon line. The idea of China as a currency manipulator. Right now, the biggest in the world is the United States. through the Federal Reserve. And the second largest is the European Central Bank. Why don't we talk about that? Secondly, the idea that China is aggressively poising its military to challenge us. Well, consider the Chinese deploying their military inside China as a threat to the United States. Well, okay, but the article I'm reading talk about how China has an aircraft carrier division in the South China Sea. Now they're talking to Djibouti about possibly setting up a base there that could be used to refuel military vessels. We're all over the world. We talk about China now tightening their internal watch over their population. What about the national security in this country? So much of what we accuse China of doing, the United States is doing on a much more aggressive, higher level. China has not started a war. How many wars have we started? So people like Cruz and Rubio were crushed by Trump in the Republican primaries. Why? Because they were neocons and Trump ran against the neocons, the neoconservatives. Now you have neoconservatives, as I said, inside and outside his administration, trying to force him back to the Bush-Obama policy. Now, let me add another thing to this. When you talk about the policies, the bad policies of the past, today it's announced by a spokesman for Obama that he's going to be very proactive in the 2018 campaign. Now, the fact is he never left politics. He's been one of the key operators in the anti-Trump mobilization around Russiagate, working with people like Clapper and Brennan and Comey. But the idea now that Obama is going to come out publicly as a popular figure to win the 2018 election for the Democrats, which will then poise them to be able to impeach Trump, this is something people should take seriously. This is the neocon operation. And those people who think neoconservatives are conservatives ought to look at the fact that Obama and Hillary Clinton are neoconservatives. And China, the way some of the so-called conservatives are, like Rubio and Cruz, you're in the camp of Hillary Clinton. And I think this is something that people, President Trump, that he completely eviscerated these guys in the primaries and defeated on precisely this issue. No regime change, no U.S. wars, and working with countries to protect American interests. That was the Trump agenda. That's what he meant when he talked about make America great again. And we've got to get back to that.
Right, correct. Yeah, it was interesting to watch Kelly, General Kelly yesterday specifically talk about how recently Trump has been able to be persuaded, influenced potentially from the military-industrial complex in regards to Afghanistan, in regards to North, South Korea. And then obviously, Trump coming out this morning and rebuking that, stating, hey, listen, as far as the wall, everything else, that it's interesting to watch this play out, Harley, in terms of the amount of military that's surrounding Trump right now.
Well, and it's not just military, because you also have neoliberals like Cohen and Mnuchin. You have neoconservatives like Dina Powell, a number of other people, McMaster. These are geopoliticians. These are people who believe that the security of the United States depends on pitting nations against each other, and the United States either taking on the strongest or the weakest, but the United States playing a role in geopolitical confrontation. That's a policy that led to World War I and World War II. It's led to all the wars after World War II, whether it's the Vietnam War, the Iraq War, the attack on Libya, the U.S. involvement in Syria. These are geopolitical wars of confrontation to benefit the corporate oligarchy. It has nothing to do with protecting the interests of the United States. The national interest of the United States right now, as the president laid out on several occasions recently, is to work with Putin against terrorism, work with Putin and Xi Jinping on North Korea, work with Putin for a solution in the Middle East and in Ukraine. That's what the president has said. And then you have these other people coming up like McMaster saying that Russia is an enemy of the United States, that China is an aggressive threat to the United States. And so it's clear that you have two different camps. And what the president must remember is the American people responded when he said he's not going to listen to these people with all their credentials who have been responsible for making policy for the last 16 years, because they got us in a no-win war. They ran up trillions of dollars in debt, and they left us no safer, in fact, in more jeopardy than we were when they came in. So that's what I'm saying. He's got to remember that and know that his friends are not the people who are egging him on to take on Russia and China.
Very well said, Harley. What else is on your radar, sir?
Well, I mentioned the people keeping an eye on the financial system. It's hard to know what's going to happen with Bitcoin, but I think those of us who said this was a bubble from the beginning and not an alternative to the dollar system, just keep an eye on it. And I would recommend that people not go head over heels into it to try and make short-term profits, because people who try to make short-term profits also tend to be the ones who come out the most hurt when the bubble is popped by the people who created it. They're the ones who make money on these things, not the average guy who goes in. So that's another point to keep in mind. The other thing just on my radar screen is we're now coming to the end of the 4th month with no government in Germany. And, it's like the situation is worsening in many ways. Europe needs a strong Germany, but not for the EU. A strong Germany is a national sovereign entity. And I had a funny discussion the other day with someone who was telling me, someone who works with the US Embassy in Berlin, and he said to me that he keeps getting asked, why doesn't the United States have an ambassador in Germany, which we don't yet? And what he said is, well, if we did, what government would we present his credentials to? So you have a situation of chaos on chaos.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Very interesting. Harley, thank you so much, for a great interview. Please share with our listeners how they can learn more about your work, learn more about LaRouche PAC. Please share that with our listeners.
Well, the best way to learn about LaRouche PAC is go to the website, larouchepac.com, which is LaRouchePAC.com. And if anyone's interested in what I was talking about tonight or this afternoon on the neocon offensive, I'm writing an article tonight on that that'll be available in the next couple of days. If you'd like to read it, send me a note, harleysch@gmail.com. That's HARLEYSCH@gmail.com. And I'll be happy to send it out to you.
Very good. Thank you so much. So everyone, this is CJ delivering another Hanging with Harley. Harley, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Okay, see you next week.
All right. Take care, everyone. We're over and out.